Wonderful. Well, welcome everyone to those who are just joining us now. Thank you all for joining us today for this live discussion. Quick introduction, my name's Miceli and I'm an account manager here at Procurement Leaders, the global community for CPOs and their leadership teams. And I'm joined today by one of our members, Charlie Miceli, Vice President, Network Chief Supply Chain Officer at the University of Vermont Health Network, who has so very kindly given up some time to talk to us about how the procurement team there at UVM is contributing to the top line through innovation within the supply base. And so the reason we've got Charlie with us today is because our recent research report called Procurement as a Growth Engine reveals that innovation represents procurement's current most significant revenue contributor. So I'll be asking him today to tell us a little bit about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and any lessons that they've learned along the way. So thank you, Charlie, for joining us today. I'll stop here for you to give a quick introduction.
Hi, good morning. My name is Charlie Miceli. I'm the Chief Supply Chain Officer for University of Vermont Health Network. We're a $2.6 billion enterprise. We take care of 1 million citizens in the United States, in northern New York, and in the state of Vermont. And we have six hospitals, one academic medical center, which has research and is kind of one of the cornerstones for some of our innovations that we've worked in supply chain, but then also in some of our smaller rural operations where we've done some pretty cool stuff that we never thought we would do, either from a pandemic perspective and a response and or just an alignment of unifying practices, ERP systems, et cetera, as we've expanded the size of our respective organization.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Charlie, for talking with me today and for sharing that with the rest of our LinkedIn viewers here. So let's kick off the conversation a bit. I want to know if there is a specific example that you can highlight from the past year or so that will help our listeners visualize the processes that you went through.
Yeah, I'll take, I got a couple of examples. One is a expansion or extension of an innovation that we started several years ago, and then we're able to expand that not only within our company, but then to other healthcare organizations that participate in a regional group purchasing organization, which is kind of an aggregation group that we have in the Northeast of the United States. So fortunately, and with great honor and humbleness, we made the short list for an innovation that we developed with a private company called Neptune app. And what the Neptune app allowed us to do was to engage with our clinicians and create a stronger relationship by providing them with not only technical specifications for implantable devices in the cardiology domain, but also to share with them the technical specs, the clinical specs, as well as the business specifications and total cost of ownership models, which they had never seen before. And it was all on a form factor, it was on their phone. And versus looking at a spreadsheet on a screen, physicians don't have time really to sit and look at a computer screen or carry around a spreadsheet to get pertinent information. So we worked in the cardiology space, and then what we did is we were fortunate enough to present this application to a larger group of hospitals that in the Northeast of the United States, and actually contracted with that group to expand into orthopedics, which is another complex, high physician engagement, clinical engagement process. And basically, innovation from my end is is driven by listening to your end users of your services and or listening to what's happening in the world, whether it's, working with procurement leaders and seeing what all of our other members, our colleagues are doing and copying that, creatively swiping, as Tom Peters says, and or having the ignition to really take a look at what we could do. So it's kind of a gift that keeps on giving, in the sense of this one application that we helped develop. Our company actually invested in this in this application, and we're part owners too, which is kind of cool. Which I never thought we would do, from a procurement perspective. But we had, having leaders. I report through the chief financial officer. To have someone that allows us, a leader that allows us to go just beyond debits equals credits and procurement transactions and contracting, but really get into innovation in the sense of what can we do new, or to enable and enhance the relationship, and potentially and eventually the outcomes of what we do in our business, which is taking care of patients.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating story there. I like the way you said, creatively swiping, and definitely not trying to reinvent the wheel. So Charlie, when we talk about scouting innovation, we need to really think about the suppliers involved, the ones that we call our strategic suppliers, right? Yeah. So these are the stakeholders who will help us find opportunities and foster them into revenue generating products or services like the one you just mentioned. So in terms of where you find your strategic suppliers, do you rely on an established list of suppliers you've used before, or have you looked further, in that space?
Yeah, I think you kind of read my mind a little bit on this, and this wasn't in the preparation questions either, but it's all about relationships from my perspective, and I've been doing this a long time. And it's not just the 3 bids in the cloud of dust type suppliers that you work with on a regular basis. Whether and a lot of our transactions are indirect, but there are some direct relationships in the sense of how we work with the leaders and the innovators within our strategic suppliers. So the way we work that is we'll do and we're doing long-term strategic partnerships now, not 3 years, not 5 years, but 10 years, which that was a big sea change for me, because I was always, do a 3-year, maybe a 2-year extension. And, it was just a transaction type business. And where we've been successful and have been able to be on the tip of innovation, whether it's new products, new clinical research, new logistics methodologies, and or enhancement of existing, just continuity of supply and third-party supplier risk management opportunities to enhance our businesses, our business transactions. It's been really, it's good. So we'll have new suppliers that we just meet, and they have something really cool, and we'll lock and load with them. And if it hits, you can't be afraid to fail. And we've had a couple that we've just said, hey, we've tried to work this out, it just didn't happen, but we learned a lot, and hope you did too. And we part as friends, because you never know when something will get improved or better. And then we develop relationships through forums, similar to Procurement Leaders, or any of the other organizations that we participate in, our group purchasing organizations, except in the healthcare space, but then also through government organizations. We've done some really cool work with Enterprise Ireland, which is a government-based group, and they're fantastic in the sense that they're able to bring to us the innovators of Ireland. And we've invested in and have actually worked with several companies that we didn't even know existed, and worked in some pretty interesting scenarios that I would have never thought of doing. Just by having that private public, even though it was a foreign public organization, having that link, and then also with our Canadian colleagues replicating the same with the Canadian government, and they're our biggest trading partner in Vermont, but sitting down with it's not like Shark Tank, but to have innovation presenters either mostly in IT, we're in our space in the U.S. and what we've seen, but also in physical products. So going back to Enterprise Ireland, we actually worked with women's undergarments that were made out of bamboo that were clinically accepted by our cancer physicians, as well as our plastics, our surgeons, for healing capabilities and comfort for our female patients. And a company called Taya Healthcare out of Ireland, out of Dublin. And the CEO, Ciara Donlan's come over prior to COVID and sat with us. We've also connected them with their innovative product to a group purchasing organization called the Green Health Exchange, which is a sustainability GPO, which we're an owner of, as well as I'm a board member of, that just started up a few years ago. So, stuff that I never even thought I would do, we're doing in the procurement world. And it's innovation on the way you think. I think it's not just a product, it's processes, it's being open to things that you never consider. And it's interesting as we get into the third-party supplier risk management and continuity of supply, where there's been innovation with surveillance systems, with risk mitigation or risk surveillance systems, not only on the business side for disruptions that occur around the world, as well as now into the cybersecurity world, which is, we worked with our IT folks very aggressively. In fact, embedded procurement folks and contracting folks within our IT space, but taking it even further than that and doing level 1, 2, and 3 interrogatories with our key suppliers that provide us with systems and/or equipment that sit on networks, and laying that out, and being an early adopter of transactions of processes like that in the healthcare sector, which we say cybersecurity equals patient safety. So it's critical. So did I answer your question? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, very fascinating that you're incorporating not only innovation, but sustainability, as well as cybersecurity, and things like you said that you had never thought you would do in procurement has given you this opportunity as well. And I think I want to try some of those bamboo undergarments.
Really interesting in that space. And what was interesting there is they had to innovate too, because Taya was contracted with HSC, with the NHS, et cetera, in the UK and in Ireland, and then the pandemic hit, so they pivoted because they had all their connections in Asia where there was a lot of manufacturing of PPE. That they pivoted and were recognized, by the Irish government as key to providing safe protection to their fellow citizens of Ireland, which was pretty cool.
Wow, yeah, that's an amazing story as well.
And that's what the smaller companies can do, or even the big, they innovate, and because if you don't innovate, you die. And it's whether it's a computer platform or a hard product, you just got to be able to you have to be receptive to change, not be afraid to fail on a pursuit, and push the envelope where you can look not only for better things, but also what's the economic value proposition
Yeah.
Works good.
Yeah, Charlie, I love that you said that, to not be afraid to fail. And, we here at Procurement Leaders have heard the term, fail fast to kind of get back up on your feet a little bit quicker. So kind of not shifting gears, but diving a little bit into more of the specifics. What sorts of questions do you ask these suppliers to gauge whether they, even have the appropriate qualities for working with you? Again, whether those are startups or new suppliers.
Yeah, so I'll start with our strategic suppliers that we have, is that we've set KPIs and quarterly business reviews and almost a report card on not what they're doing, but what are we doing, and are we fulfilling, what can we do better to engage deeper into the resources that are potentially available with our suppliers. Because typically, procurement in most instances, works with sales engineers on the sales side. But what we've been able to do, and we've done a lot of work in demand planning, is which is not very strong in our sector right now, but it's a point of pursuit, is really meet with the supply chain execs that make the companies run, and not disregarding the sales folks, but really working on the inside. And you don't get that access unless you have that strong strategic relationship. When we develop relationships, either with the government or with through government organizations, obviously we want to know the backgrounds of the companies, where they came from, what's their story, because a lot of times the story of how they founded sells sells them to the next level of engagement. And then when we find a company, or we develop, we developed this app almost as a anti-group purchasing organization tool, because our physicians did not want to participate in a certain competitive market assessment. They wanted to have more choice, instead of having a choice of 80% with one company, 20% with the balance. They wanted something different. So I said, well, as long as you help us in negotiating, as long as you help us in aligning with the critical specifications and the economics, and you get what you need, if we can balance that out. So that was innovative on our part versus just doing a pure business transactions. And we allowed the physicians, and recruited the physicians to actually recruit with us. So I could have a physician. This was pretty interesting, because after we do an after action, after we sit down with them and negotiate, and we'll sit with the senior execs from our supplier base and say, well, how was this too aggressive? How did we work it out? Did you guys, do we accommodate what you wanted? And did we try to run, what's Kate's program, the Orange program out of Tennessee? We try to work her mojo into the discussions that we have. Kate Visisek, I can't remember the name of her program, but it's very good. It's beyond win-win. It's really understanding, what the requirements are. And, we had a physician sit down and said, I've worked 30 years with your company. I've implanted $50 million worth of your devices. I really want to work with you. I love your technology. I want to work with it. Your economics aren't fair, and we need help. And you saw things light up in the discussion, that if it was just us in the discussion as negotiators, just on the business to business, we would have been fighting over pennies versus dollars. And to have the end user make that comment, number one, state that they've used a product for such a long time, they love the clinical results, but then they come back and say, well, I understand the economics now, and they're not what they're supposed to be. So let's take it to the next level. And that was new for me. And instead of just having engineers and contract and attorneys and everybody and finance people doing stuff, we brought the end users into the mix. So, and that's how we we work with our strategic companies. When we look at a new company, again, we do the background stuff on them. We use tools like Rapid Ratings and Resolink and other measurement tools. Now one's called Sensinet and now I know there's other ones for CSR for sustainability, just to see where they're sitting and what's their glide path. They might not have the answer now or the solution now, but if they're measuring where they're going and they can say, hey, we're 50% there, we'll be on full reprocessing of single-use devices, or our sustainability program is just started because we're new. We almost mentor them, and we've started doing that with MBE and WBE companies too, where we met folks during the pandemic that they had the right mission, they just didn't know how to navigate in the healthcare space. And what we did with one company called Rhino Medical out of South Carolina is two young men, they worked in finance and they wanted to help small hospitals with supply. So we connected with them, gave them some guidance, and they had good sources. They just didn't know how to navigate. So we gave them that guidance. Then we hooked them up with, we were interviewed by a business writer, Joe Nocera, and Joe detailed them in a Bloomberg article. And they so happened to open up, they didn't have a website. They put a website up and they got 60,000 hits in one day. And now they're off to the races, doing very well. They're on national contracts. So, we innovated in the sense of mentoring and relationship building with companies that had a viable product or service that we vetted, that we were the test, because if they could take care of us, they could take probably care of our peer organizations. And then we became a connector. And I think, innovation is about connections, because you don't know what you don't know until you make that first handshake or the first Zoom, or I don't even know what platform we're on, the LinkedIn platform, but which is a pretty cool platform. But when you sign up and you make that connection, you don't know where it's going to go. And, it's probably 50-50 chance that something's going to stick, but I'd rather be 50-50 than 0-100. And so it's been a good journey so far.
Yeah, absolutely, Charlie. And I think, and we've talked about new suppliers, existing strategic suppliers. And again, you may have dug into this a bit, but I would love to know your relationships and how you really work, if you do, with startups for innovation opportunities. And so maybe what risks you consider and how you've worked with not only new companies for you guys, but with startups as well.
Yeah. Having been in a startup that did really good for a while and then, melted down. I know the good parts and the bad parts, but, with a startup company, obviously there has to be trust, and you have to have that relationship beyond whatever service or product that they have. And so, we have a lot of discussions first. So we socialize in the sense of, when, pre-pandemic, we'd have a supper, we'd have their key leaders or originators of the company meet with our executives just to do a sniff test to say, hey, these guys real? What do they have? I'm fortunate where I have clinical experts on my procurement team that have good backgrounds, and they're kind of good BS detectors to say, well, yeah, this is a Me Too product. It's not new. It's cool. What's the end result? How does it help us? Does it help a patient? Does it help the company? Is it economically? Is it effectiveness? And so they have to tell us, they have to go beyond their pitch deck on what they do. We've been fortunate where we stood up a ventures group 2.5 years ago, and we saw some really cool stuff. We walked away from some of it because it didn't meet the mission, but it was still really cool. And in fact, some of those ones that we passed on actually have because they didn't fit into our healthcare segment, they jumped off. There's a company right in town here called Beta Technologies, and they have electronic vertical takeoff aircraft. And they went from just a startup thinking about it with a great mission, and turns out UPS just ordered 160 airplanes from them.
Oh,
Which
wow.
and they're right across, they're right down the street. And as it turns out, I do biomedical engineering. It's the son of the leader of our biomedical engineer, which I didn't even know. And during the pandemic, they actually pivoted with their technology and created an ambu bag squeezer. I don't know if you guys remember in the beginning of the pandemic in Italy, they had people standing over patients and squeezing these ambu bags. They actually came up with a robotic device that did it. And they took their plane technology and moved it over. So even though we did the due diligence and said, we're not going to invest in you, but we know it's a cool thing, we always kept that contact. And in some other instances, with the undergarment company, with Thea Healthcare, the first question one of our CEO said is, when are they going to make male fabric clothing? And because he's a surgeon and he saw a requirement, for that. And so when you get these dialogues and you meet with the companies, you're going way beyond just a buy-sell relationship. And that's part of it. And then we've seen some other companies, they've had a great idea, they just couldn't execute. And they didn't make it. So, positive and negative. Software companies, you have to really do a lot of risk analysis, not only for, we know that they're the risk, and what I mean is the risk on them being sustained and doing business. If they're not publicly traded, which a lot of them aren't, what's their strategy for fundraising? Do they have PE? What type of round are they in? So things that I never, like, I wasn't familiar with the word tranche. When they were talking about tranches and ventures, being living up in New England, I thought it was some type of seafood component. So, but then when we really started looking at it, we've actually supported some companies in their funding rounds as a reference, and that really helps. And then the reciprocity on the other side is, you work on development, you have folks listen. We've been with one company we were the first customer back in 2008, and we actually helped develop the product. So we don't pay for the product, we use it. It's a software system, but we also help develop, and we've helped commercialize it to the set, and it helps us and it helps the company, and they've grown and they've built their base. So different types of relationships. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that relationship building is absolutely key as well. And then you did mention some risks there. Absolutely. So kind of just shifting a little bit back to, away from startups, back to your existing, supply base, things like that. Scouting services are definitely a useful supplement in this scenario. And so my question to you is, do you utilize them? Have you found them difficult or easy to work with? And if there's one consideration that you'd highlight when working with scouting services, what is it?
Yeah, it's kind of cool in the healthcare space. There's a couple of companies that are actually out there as scouts. So, and we've met with, and they bring the innovation to us, which is nice. And we do, it's what's a good way to explain? There are a bunch of folks that worked in the industry, and they were probably at the tail end of where they were going to go. Some of them are prior CEOs and don't want to retire, but they just want to, continue in the game. So they kind of remember how they started. And we're actually meeting with some companies on Friday to talk about, because they've got either products or services that when they're presented to us, we vet them. And if they hit certain criteria of it's almost like a stage gate that you do in IT. If they pass the first gate, which these guys have, then we're going to meet with them to see, we want to see the product. we want to know bring your books, show us where you are financially. And this is only to maybe use their product and become a reference site. So there's more companies like that are I call them agencies that are coming up, that they're representing entrepreneurs or innovators. The other thing, which is kind of cool, is the group purchasing organizations in the US and the healthcare sector are developing and initiating innovation presentations on an annualized basis, and actually are working, doing commercialization of relationships and or products, which, our app that we developed, we actually won the innovation award. And but what was interesting, at the first time through, the group that gave us the innovation award, they wouldn't sign an NDA. So we said, oh, we're not going to deal with you. And so 3 years later, but we never say never. 3 years later, now we're on their contract paper because we proved that we had a cool product, and the leadership saw where there was a benefit, and they brought it out to their members. So it just took, everything's timing. You never say never, because what's no today could be yes, 18 months from now. And it's just a matter of what's the bandwidth that your organization has, and or what's the potential impact that we could have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you mentioned that bringing kind of their financial statements and their books for that is also key. And so one of my questions is there another thing you do besides that, or how did you provide the necessary financial evidence or vetting of that, and then also the financial evidence of the project's contribution?
I hate to be an advertisement, but we use like a rapid ratings to do a deep dive, especially for the IT companies, and we make it part of our competitive market assessment when we're looking at firms for either products or services. They have to comply if they're not publicly traded. They have to sit with us and fill out the surveys, and then have their CFO or executive folks walk us through. And we know, like if cash positions change, and or if EBIT is different, or there's all these components that you need to take into consideration. And those services are really good because they kind of put it in I call it a horsey ducky, or pretty easy to understand. So you don't have to be a CFO to articulate and understand the situation. It's in basic business English versus in CPA language. And so when we sit with those companies, and then when they come in and they show us our projected sales forecast, I mean, I always cut by 2/3 what they're saying, unless they have signed agreements. But their aspirations are important, because if you don't have that hunger, you're not gonna you can't just sit on what your existing client base. So some of it is art, it's not science and math, and a lot of it's gut. But that's why that relationship component is critical. Mm-hmm. So, and understanding that, and again, using these third-party services that are available now, and or peer review from other independent agencies. We use a source called the ECRI Institute, which is they're kind of consumer reports for high-tech medical equipment. But when we see something innovative, they have all this compendium of scientific data that is independent. So it's not industry-sponsored research. It's really what's been out there, if it does exist, and what's the veracity or the level of integrity. And they give you kind of a dial and say, well, it's almost like a BS meter. And if it's down here, it's kind of like, yeah, but if it's up in the middle and it's going towards the third and fourth quadrants, that it's something that we should pursue and do a deeper dive on. So there's tools out there that do that now, which is great. So
yeah, absolutely. And so kind of shifting back a little bit internally, and once you have that project, how do you provide one the ROI to maybe your C-suite or your board, and then also the financial evidence of, how the project contributed to revenue growth within UVM.
Yeah, we had to do that with the InSync app, and because even though we own part of it, we still pay a subscription fee to use it. And if I look at what we invested and what we pay for a usage fee, it was, and this was audited, it was 5x return. So we set up pretty high standard. I want 3 to 5x on anything we pursue, and that's new. And if it's a service that doesn't necessarily, and this is in procurement, whether it's an analytical tool, like we use several benchmarking systems, and in aggregate, I may spend, let's say $500,000 on, these tools, but I can exactly attribute, and if I use 3 sources or 3 benchmarking systems, I don't look for alignment, I look for dissonance. And so it's that difference. If everybody says everything is great, that's good. But if one of our sources says, everything's good except this one thing, we'll take that point and bring it back. And those points of dissonance, whether it's an innovation, it's innovative from our perspective, because then we engage with the end user and say, hey, we need your help. Let's go get the ground truth on this and figure it out. And that gives us another X sometimes on the multiplier for the investment that we're making, whether it's in our OpEx or CapEx program. And so we set up the KPIs right up front if we're going to do something, and we measure monthly what's happening. And sometimes it's slow, like the first 90 days, 6 months, sometimes a year, there's nothing there. And then all of a sudden, there's this big watershed event where you do this one transaction where having that innovation either helped us in our decision process, in our negotiation process, and or if the product actually took and did what it said it was supposed to do, and we can show that, whether it mitigated infection risk or anything like that. We had a situation where we didn't want to build a custom product for infection prevention, and it cost us, if we did that, it was a $300,000 spend, and it would cost us $372,000 to go with instead of a regularly manufactured product, to go to something that we designed, that we innovated on. And so there was a lot of pushback because money was tight, and it wasn't a big spend, but it was significant. But then we looked at, we sat with our infection prevention folks and our quality folks, and they said, well, one central line infection that you get costs $82,000, in post care and medicine and everything, drug and everything else. So all we had to do was prevent 1 1/10 of a infection with this new device, and we made it. Well, it mitigated. We went from X amount to 0 for a year and a half, which we won a patient safety award and everything for that. And it was because of this innovation that of something that was, the barrier was the economics on its face on the procurement side. But once we took a deeper dive and looked at what the total cost of utilization was and what the benefit was, it was a no-brainer. And that was like 13 years ago, and that kind of set the seed for we look at cost, but that's not the sole determinant. So
yeah, absolutely.
What's the result on the back end?
Yeah, exactly. So and then I think in turn, and I know you said that was maybe 10 couple years ago, has the way you approach this and really changed procurement's position and perception within the business?
Yeah, I mean, we had a seat at the table prior, just because of our performance from cost management perspective, and but once after the hurricanes hit Hurricane Maria hit back in 2018. Procurement not only became, continuity of supply supporting and risk management, but at the end of the day, and especially when the pandemic hit, revenue assurance. And because if we can't get, supply or services for us to take care of our patients and protect our staff and protect our patients and families, then there's no business. And like surgery. So we used analytic models to project when, there was response when the pandemic hit, but then using statistics and algorithms to look at, well, when we started to recover and when we went from less than 10% prior COVID transactions in the surgical space to 30% to 40%, the supply chains were still critically injured. Were we able to sustain the continuity of supply and enhance that so we could start taking care of patients again? Because we had all these delayed surgeries, all these delayed visits, and we moved very quickly. We went from not 0% telehealth or telemedicine to now it's 35% of our business, and taking care of folks is telemedicine. And it was a catalyst, but you have to do it the right way. And, we had to innovate in that perspective because we weren't used to that. And then, the biggest innovation I think is going to happen now is how do we go back to work and how we work? And do we stay, is it, what I saw the other day, WFH, work from home? Is it a hybrid model? My attorneys that work in my group and my contract folks, they're never coming back to the office. They work better at home. We've already assessed that and rated it. Our logisticians and everybody else that are on site will be on site in a hybrid. So even how you work in that respect, and some of the technologies that didn't have any catalyst or interest prior to the pandemic are now front and center, like the hospital at home now. One of my procurement colleagues left his position. He was a software developer in supply chain. He left his position to go work for a hospital at home. We were kind of like, what are you talking about? We kind of laughed at him. Well, now they're the hottest thing, in the market right now. And a lot of large healthcare organizations, you bring the hospital to the home and the patient care right to the home, beyond home health, but actual, not tertiary type care, but level 1 tertiary type care, which is really interesting. And that innovation didn't have any legs, before. It was all on paper. Now it's actually happening. So it makes you look at everything that you work on now, which is good. And it's around the world. It's not just in America. It's whether it's microeconomics, helping the small folks. If we can seed a company that either can help a community, whether they're in rural, Africa, or in a large city in Mumbai or in Europe, you have to take all the blinders off. And how is innovation going to help everybody? And healthcare is kind of easy because typically what you're doing is you want to help. You're in this work because you want to help. But I guess my listening skills over the last year and a half have been enhanced. I guess maybe post Hurricane Maria, just because of understanding the risk in the supply chain and the opportunity to use services and tools to help us become stronger, and help not necessarily predict but prepare. And innovation, part of innovation is preparation, and how do we listen better? And you never say no. I'll take as many meetings as I can, unless it's something that's totally not valid, because you'll never make the transaction unless you do that, unless you listen. And there's been some really cool stuff that's happened, like this app that we developed came out of a negative situation. And I didn't even know it existed until I was in grocery shopping looking for IPA beer, and one of our physicians came with his iPhone, showed me his phone and said, "Hey, look at what we just did." And I go, "When'd you do that?" And he goes, "You said we could do this a year ago." And I said, "Oh." And I saw it and I was like, "Oh my gosh." And that's when we took off with it. So, it's giving people permission. It's listening to your folks and then giving them permission to move forward. And it doesn't matter where you are around the globe. It's listening and where that can be developed. So I hope I answered your question, but
Yeah.
it's a lot of stories, and some of the stories resonate and some of them don't. And the ones that resonate, I think, are the catalyst for the innovation to take it further and maybe even expanding what the initial idea was, because now you got somebody that's going to use what you've made or the service that you've developed and expand it. So.
Mm-hmm. And Charlie, you mentioned that preparation or innovation is preparation, right? And so, and this might not have been on the prep questions either, but I'm really keen to understand, a lot of our members, and especially members I'm working with, are really trying to understand and mitigate risk. So how are you mitigating some of that risk when it comes to innovation scouting with your suppliers?
Yeah, we treat the innovative pursuit just like we do a strategic supplier or anybody else. We embrace what they're doing, but then we say, and we tell them up front, we need to assess, are you guys going to be around in a year? What could sink you? And you have a pretty good honest dialogue, if you're doing that, and especially when somebody shows you where their financials are. And we had one company that they've been great for us. They did a reverse IPO, and they went from a private company, which we had worked with for a year, to a publicly traded company. And that changes the relationship in the sense of, what you know and what you can't know. And, because now they're in the public domain and they got to follow rules. And so, but the innovation didn't stop. It just went a different way. And, you have different guardrails that you have to look at. And it's different with a privately held company. You can probably do more aggressive innovation, but even with the larger companies or the strategic suppliers, it's finding the right people inside the company that can engage and actually have the passion to, number one, tell the truth. And number two, actually say, where are we going to go? And, NDAs come up because you want to protect the IP of the innovator. And so we're not averse to doing NDAs, but we also require NDAs when we're doing stuff too. And when we started doing with our innovation, we had company, well, we won't send it. I said, well, smell you later. We're not going to deal with you. And we walked away. So it's that so you assess the risk with the tools that you have. And then you also assess, you have to get up close and personal with the company and not, it's not just a website. It's not just a sales, pitch deck. It's really understanding the core, where they come from, how did they work that. And you're almost running like a little Shark Tank type operation, but it's real. It's not made for TV. So
love that show. One last question,
yeah.
Charlie, before we, I know we're coming up on time here. I think we have about 10-ish minutes left. But what innovation project plans do you have lined up?
Right now, we're still in our this app world, that with the app that we've developed, and expanding that and integrating now not just the business information, but the clinical outcome information. And if we're successful in doing that, that's going to be a game changer, because you'll be able to see on a longitudinal scale. This is my decision I made. This is what I used. This is what I implanted, and then here's the result with the patient. Now, obviously, everything is de-identified and stuff like that, but we'll have that type of process there. And if we can do it, then it's going to be interesting to see from a procurement perspective, what can we do with our other technology suppliers and our product suppliers to get that same, can we see what the outcome is? Because it's always been, this is what it does, this is how much it costs, this is how much it's going to save you. We know it's good for the patient, but we haven't had a way to measure it, because there's a time scale, or there's a latency on that. And with the implementation of advanced, electronic health record in the corresponding technologies that they have, the ancillary systems, how you run your operating rooms, your imaging, your dialysis, all these different components, you're collecting all this data. And how do we turn that data into information that is useful not only for the now but down the road? And can we predict where we need to go from a support basis? And can we predict our demand on the business side for the manufacturers, so we can take cost out of their system? So instead of making these big, and we're working on that right now, instead of making these big bulk procurements of supply and then running that through because you get a great price on the front end, but there may be muda or waste on the back end. Can we have direct lines based on our patterns and give those to the manufacturers based out of the information that we collect, so they can work their production lines? And as we get away from, it's going to be interesting as people move away from JIT or some type of hybrid just in time, because how we got hit, through the weather events as well as the pandemic events and the disruptions. It's going to be really interesting to see how, I'm looking for innovation in demand planning and alignment and supplier relationship management. I think, in our world, in the procurement world, whatever comes up there is going to be the cool stuff, and build that relationship. And I know there's companies that are trying to do that now, which is good. And where do you set up? Is there such thing as like a digital twin for the relationship? Not just the business relationship, but can we project out and create scenarios like 5 years from now? Do we know where there's enough, if the companies can look at their research and say, well, there's this amorphous silicone thing that's going to come out and it's going to change the way that we work stuff. And so just all different things. But again, if I go back to what I said in the beginning, from innovation on our end is we have our antenna out, and we take as many meetings as we can if we can, and we do an initial vetting. And now there's agencies that are establishing in the healthcare sector. They're not PE folk, they're not private equity, they're not ventures, they're aggregators of innovation. And they're the pipe to us. And having that relationship early, we get to see stuff faster than some of the, it helps us punch above our weight as an organization too. So it's complex.
Absolutely. So I know, again, we're kind of running up on time here, and there hasn't been too many questions come in through the chat. So if you have any now, we probably have time for one or two. But Charlie, anything else that you just, wanted to share with some of the listeners today that, you feel is important as you are looking at innovation as a growth and revenue engine here?
Yeah, I think, and again, I don't want to be a commercial for Procurement Leaders, but I am going to say the way we dialogue together, either through scenarios like this or on CPO calls that we've had bi-weekly, It's what's that Donald Rumsfeld, the unknown unknown. You don't know unless you see what's out there. I can't remember the name of the company, but there was a drone company that we saw a few years ago that they were working in Rwanda and they were delivering medical supplies. Well, one of our healthcare organizations, Novant, down in North Carolina, they just contracted with them and to try to move small medical supply via drones. We make a joke here because we met with them too early. Sometimes you meet with, you have to look at the timing. And so when and sometimes you get reassurance from sitting in these groups on what's going on. And I guess the other thing is that the relationship, going back old school, it's not just a transaction anymore. Sure, there's a lot of, transactions that are going to always occur, but it's beyond the transaction to have that mindset and to listen and to align maybe with folks outside of your industry, just to understand what they're going through and what may be an innovation for us. And the healthcare sector could be, we've been doing that for 10 years, but that's your proof of concept. And I can call, Bob Murphy at IBM, and he's a great resource, and IBM's a great company. And what they've done in procurement, either from sustainability, from diversity, et cetera, we can learn from them, and they can learn from us. And I think that's the secret sauce. And it doesn't matter what country you're in either. I can see there's folks from all around the globe here, and I wish I could talk in every language that was here, but I can't. And I sit on a foundation, Patient Safety Movement Foundation, which is worldwide. We're aligned with the World Health Organization and stuff. And what we've done for innovation in that group, has come out of a supply chain and procurement. A lot of the stuff is just evidence and working with either large companies and or innovative companies and they're not all from, the rich countries of the world or the economic advantage companies. From around the world, folks have come up with ideas, or use cases for, using ultrasounds in Uganda for perinatal or prenatal testing saved, 100,000 lives. And that was an innovation of one of our docs. Making a mission over Uganda, working not with physicians, but working with midwives, and then working with Philips and GE and other large international companies to provide a healthcare solution, an innovative healthcare solution on the ground that's got minimal infrastructure, compared to what we have in our environment. So that was innovation, cultural, clinical, business-wise. And then device-wise, they came up with a $5,000 ultrasound machine, which, is now point-of-care ultrasound across the world now, which is pretty cool. But it came through that relationship as I started out. So that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, no, great, Charlie. And I think, being here an account manager at Procurement Leaders, I 100% agree with you that you're not going to get through, especially a time like this alone. And you have to find ideas and new ideas outside of your industry so as to not reinvent the wheel, right? So I think this is a good place to maybe, wrap things up. Thank you again so much, Charlie, for joining us today. I think, the conversation was super interesting, and I'm sure the listeners got a lot out of what you shared today. And so for the audience, if you've really heard anything that you'd like to know more about in today's discussion, you can read the light version of the report over on the Procurement Leaders website. The link, I believe, is going to be popped up into the chat here quickly. And then there are definitely more resources on this topic and others on the site too. So while you're there, please do take a look around. And for our members on the line, you can get exclusive access to more detailed case studies through your member portal, as well as for the full report. And if you have any questions, please reach out to your account manager. Thanks to the audience for joining us today. We will be back soon to bring more live discussions with more of the world's procurement leaders. So again, thank you, Charlie.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody.